Hi, Misha here, and this is one I've been looking forward to showing you and talking about. This is the Boeing NB-52B, serial number 520008, kind of officially known as Challenger, but probably much more familiar to people with its unofficial name of Balls 8, which is kind of an old U.S. Air Force way of referring to a plane with a tail number with 2 zeros or more. And since a few of you have asked me to show you my balls here, yeah, let's talk about this neat little model from Corgi I picked up. It comes complete with a little friend. Yeah, the North American X-15 experimental rocket plane. First, though, a little bit about this model and how I ended up with it. This is from Corgi. It's part of their aviation archive series, although it's a very old one, and it's been out of print for years, maybe even a decade now. It has the usual Corgi features. It has gear up or down. It's primarily die-cast metal, and as you saw, it comes with a little detachable X-15. And since it's an older Corgi, it's got the all-metal stand, which is brilliant. Now this is in 1/144 scale, and it's already quite large, about 15 inches by 15 inches. Would a 1/72 scale B-52 be impressive? Hell yeah. Would I have a shelf to put it on? Hell no. So yeah, for this, it works. And I've done videos on Corgi B-52s in the past, the E, or the F, I can't remember, and then later H, military models, and I wanted to get a B-52B or B-52C, an early U.S. Air Force model. And Akins had found a Corgi B-52C in the back a while ago, and I thought about it, but they've been cleaning out their warehouse, and I'm actually very glad I did not jump on the 52C, because during a cleanup about a month ago, they found one of these. And it had just been sitting in the warehouse, so new old stock. Like I said, this is the NB-52B. And the early Bs, well, these were the first production service-ready ones. The B-52A was considered a service aircraft, not an experimental, but they were never considered combat capable. They were only reserved for training, and they only built a small number. They built about 50 B-52B variants. The design was introduced in 1952. The first prototype or first production model flew at the end of 1954, and it was entered into service in the summer of 1955. Now, number 8 here started off as an RB-52B, which was a reconnaissance version, and she first flew in June of 1955 and would enter into U.S. Air Force service for a few years. And, this is a large aircraft, nearly 160 feet long, a wingspan of over 180 feet. Now, of course, this has the earlier engines and the lower fuel capacity. And in the U.S. Air Force service, they use these to set some records and fly some tours around the world. But the truth is, the 52B was not perfected. They would soon move on to the C, the D, the E, and the F. And the B was soon out of production. And they started to pull these from service in the early 60s, and the U.S. Air Force retired their last B version in the summer of 1966. But, Balls 8 here had a pretty brief U.S. Air Force service, because in 1958, it was transferred to NACA soon to be NASA, and would kind of have a second life. One nice thing about this stand is it's a cradle, so you can actually put the plane in upside down. So this was transferred to North American Aviation in 1958, where they transformed it into the NB-52B, primarily by adding this pylon inboard of the engines, kind of a cradle pallet. They also had to cut back the edge of the wing and flap here about a good little bit so it could perform its duties. They also removed the military equipment, turning the rear gunner's position. In the B model, this was manned. Later, B-52s it would not be. That became an observation blister. And, of course, the military positions would give way to scientific and observation, because this was going to become a mothership. Literally, this was an aircraft that carried aircraft, meaning this was a flying aircraft carrier. And it would be transferred to NASA and begin its service 1959, June 8, and it would enter into history. While we still cannot answer the age-old question of what does God need with a starship, we definitely can answer it for what does NASA need with the B-52. Yeah, they needed a mothership for their new X-15 rocket experimental plane designed by North American. They would actually build 3 of these for NASA, and they would each be slightly different. In fact, number 2 would be rebuilt. And these were experimental aircraft to help design, well, future aircraft as well as future spacecraft. But since they were rocket powered and only had about a minute and a half worth of fuel, they were never designed and never really could take off from the ground. So, get them up to speed, literally, and let them launch from a B-52. Now, this was one of 2. NASA also had the NB-52A, and that was tail number 003, or 0003, and it actually performed the first couple of flights, and they went through stages. The first 4 missions for number 8 here, it would do other things. It wouldn't be dropping the X-15. But finally, on its 5th mission, in January of 1960, its time came. And it took aloft this little rocket. And when it got up to, really this thing, its maximum speed was about 640 miles per hour with a cruise speed of about 520, 530. Well, getting close to cruise at about 500 miles per hour, and getting close to its maximum altitude of about 50,000 feet at about 8.5 miles up, it would cut loose of this little jobber here, giving it quite the head start. It would drop and then activate its main rocket motor and soar upwards. Now, the X-15 in 1960, when it first started really doing its thing, this was before Mercury, even before the Russians had put Gagarin in space. It was leading edge technology. And had interesting things like RCS thrusters, reactive control, like a spaceship, because where this thing was operating was at the bleeding edge of space. It had heat-resistant tiles on its hull. It really didn't have to worry about a big wingspan or a traditional tail because the altitudes it was at, there was basically no atmosphere anyway, and obviously a jet engine wouldn't work. It needed a true rocket. Had a crew of 1. It was not tiny, about 50 feet long, but only a wingspan of about 22 feet. Pretty stubby. It had a few amenities like an ejection seat. Of course, the pilot wore a pressure suit, but it was for short missions. Now, it did land. It had a retracting wheel in the front, and it had skids that would come down in the back. Right here, you can see them on the model. But they had to eject the bottom fin before it could land. It would actually have a little parachute on it where they could recover it, because this was very much a reusable craft, and all three of them did fly many missions. But yeah, it had some really keen performance. For example, in 1967, it set a speed record for a manned aircraft. At about 19 miles up, it achieved a speed of 4,520 miles per hour, which, depending on exact altitude and all that, is roughly Mach 6. Mach gets a little different depending on altitude and atmospheric conditions. This also went over 350,000 feet into the sky, which meant that its 13 pilots over the years became astronauts. The military ones got their wings. The civilian ones later were honored with being considered astronauts. So this was scraping the edge of space. It still was lower than the Mercury flights, but where it was at, there was no atmosphere, and it's just sheer brute force thrust. So it would go up, achieve speeds, and then it would essentially come back down unpowered. In fact, some of the flights were totally unpowered with these. And I'm sure I'll talk more about the X-15, but I had to mention it here. This model's neat. It's just a small little model. It's primarily plastic, but it does have some metal in it, and that is kind of one of the neat features. The way it attaches, you notice there's no pegs, holes. It uses the magic of magnets, which is just brilliant. It's not a super duper duper strong magnet, but it's more than enough to get it in its little cradle there. And because of the cutout for the tail and just the shape of the cradle, it sets well positioned. The X-15 would be flown on 199 missions between 1959 and 1968. The last actual mission, which was flown by Balls 8 here, was in October. There was a 200th mission planned, but after many delays, and with them reaching the moon, literally, the X-15 program was canceled in December of 1968. So the program lasted just shy of a full decade. And of the 199 missions, Balls 8 here flew 106 of them with the plane under its wing, and some more with support roles going on. I really like this exploration and science rocketry stuff. It's just neat to me, and this is a neat model. So 3 X-15s were made. Number 1 had a relatively uneventful life, at least compared to its siblings. Number 2 would fly, but it would be majorly damaged during a crash landing, so it had to be totally rebuilt. Its pilot survived, at least for a few years, but he sustained lifelong injuries and would pass away in a few years after, unfortunately. But Dash 2 would be rebuilt with auxiliary fuel tanks and trying out more things, and would continue to fly. Tragically, Dash 3, kind of during a descent, it would the controls would lose. Well, they were operating at their max, and it just wasn't enough. It entered into a spin. Stresses got too great, and it broke apart, unfortunately killing the pilot. They did have an ejection seat, but it would not have been safe for him to use it in those situations. If he even could, he probably couldn't because of the stresses. So Dash 2 was damaged and returned to flight, and Dash 3 was lost. So 2 of them survive in museums today. What about old Balls 8 here? Well, just because the X-15 program was over, that did not mean NASA was done with it. It would be used in the X-24 program, the X-43 program, which actually achieved a speed of over Mach 9, as well as many, many others. And it would continue to fly for NASA dozens of missions throughout the 70s and 80s, even into the 90s. Like I said, the U.S. Air Force had all their Bs retired by 1966. Even the Cs, the Ds, the Es, and the Fs were all retired. And even then, the Gs were retired. This thing, an early B model, was still flying when only the latest H models were. And it would continue to do so, but it was finally let out to pasture on December 17th, 2004. It was the last of its kind to fly for many years, and it actually had the lowest number of flight hours of any B-52 in the world at the time. It was just kind of the last of a breed, and NASA, well, they got over 4 decades of good service out of it for peaceful scientific missions. It helped develop aircraft, spacecraft. It helped track weather phenomenon. It helped with environmental causes. Yeah, it was a peaceful thing, and kind of interesting way to turn a bomber. And it certainly played a hand in getting to the moon, frankly. And that's why I really wanted this model. A couple of years ago, Aikens thought they found a B-29 with the X-1 under it, kind of a similar arrangement to this. Unfortunately, they didn't have it. They thought they did. So that bummed me out. But when this popped up, well, I would still want the B-29 with the X-1. This was still a really good thing. For one thing, it gave me an early B-52, but still different from what I already had. And the X-15 has a lot going for it. Pretty much all the big names at NASA flew it. Crossfield, Angle, Armstrong. Yeah, it played a role and was just a key piece of NASA technology that lasted them through Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, even into the era of the space shuttle. Technology from the X-15 was being utilized. Plus, I gotta admit, I just think the fact that this thing's held on by a magnet is brilliantly good. So, yeah, there you have it. What do you think? Do you like the early B model, or do you prefer the later Gs and Hs? Originally, this would have had a 50 caliber gun turret in the rear. Yep. Just trying to find you some interesting aircraft videos. There haven't been a lot of new ones coming out. But this is a big and heavy model, as it should be for it being a B-52. Now, if only Corgi made a B-1B or a B-2 in 1/44 scale, that would be pretty nifty. I'd be down for that. But, yeah, please let me know what you think. Appreciate you hanging out with me. If you'd like to hear more about X-planes, X-1, the X-3, the X-24, the X-29, let me know. And then maybe I can kind of work on doing an X-plane series eventually this year. As always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And as always, I welcome you to comment. Tell me what you think of my balls. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.